everyone, and welcome to Book Your Summer Live. My name is James, and I use he, him pronouns, and I work at Penguin Team. I'm very excited to be moderating our panel this afternoon on realistic relationships, and we have a positively star-studded roster of 6 YA contemporary authors whom I'll be chatting with. So we'll get started with introductions, and if you could each turn on your camera and audio and introduce yourself with your preferred pronouns as I call your name and tell us a little about your book. So we're gonna start with Adib Khorram.
Hi everyone, I'm Adib Khorram. I use he and him pronouns, and if the remark about this being a star-studded panel is a reference to how shiny my forehead is, I object. I'm the author of Darius the Great is Not Okay and Darius the Great Deserves Better, which comes out this Tuesday, which is an alarming fact in and of itself.
Oh my gosh, I forgot it's only 4 days from now.
It's 4 days from now. Did I forget part of the intro? I was so overwhelmed.
Oh, no, you didn't.
In a joke about how my forehead is shiny. Okay, good. I'm going to stop talking now.
Well, thank you, Adib. And next up, we have Arvin Amadi.
Hello, I'm Arvin Amadi, he, him. I am the author of How It All Blew Up, which comes out in a month from tomorrow. And How It All Blew Up is about an 18-year-old boy, Amir, who is Iranian and gay and Muslim, and he runs away to Rome, where he has a summer of adventure and found family.
And I also have your book cover here. We unfortunately don't, yes, it's a little glary because it's an iPad screen, but we're just gonna work with it. Thanks, Arvin. Next up, we have Ashley Woodfolk.
Okay, hi. My name's Ashley Woodfolk. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the author of a few different books. The Beauty That Remains, oh, it's funny, was my debut. When You Were Everything came out in March. And then I have 2 books coming out on September 1st. The first one is called Fly Girls, Lux the New Girl, and the second one I don't have a copy of, but it's called Micah, the Good Girl. And the Fly Girl series is about 4 kids who go to an art school in Harlem, and they play pranks and sort of deal with everything else going on in their lives at the same time.
Actually, I do happen to have a copy of Micah's. Yes. Do you want to show off? The covers are just amazing, and so are the words within, too.
Thank you.
Ashley, don't forget to introduce your special guest.
Oh, yes, we have my special guest, Winnie, over here on the bed. My puppy, Winnie. But I should say about Fly Girls really quickly that these are really short novels. They're only about 150 pages, so they're great for reluctant readers or for tweens who read up. Content-wise, they're perfect for tweens, too. So.
Perfect. All right, next up we have Ginoda Petrus. Could you turn your camera on and introduce yourself, Ginoda?
I'll try to have a reveal moment. My name is Ginoda. Oh gosh. All right. I go by she, her pronouns, and I wrote this book called The Stars and the Blackness Between Them. And it's about 2 Black girls, one from Trinidad, one from Minneapolis, connecting, falling in love, and learning like existential cosmic, sort of love through each other is the way I would describe it.
And it's beautiful.
And it's beautiful. And Ashley is one to trust. But I'm so geeked to be on this like panel. Like this is a bad B panel, if I could say that. And that's all.
Very much, we could all see your lovely faces in person, but we'll have to settle for the next best thing, which is certainly this. All right, next up, we have Nina Lacour. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Lacour. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I use she, her pronouns. I've written several books with Penguin. My last one was We Are Okay, and my new one is Watch Over Me. I don't have a physical copy yet, but it's so beautiful. I can't wait to hold it. It comes out on September 15th. And it is the story of a girl named Mila who goes to, she's spent the last few years in the foster system, and she has just turned 18, and she goes to accept an internship on the Northern California coast. And she's really looking forward to this new family that she's going to be kind of folded into on this farm. But the first night there, she looks across the field and she sees a ghost, and she has to learn what this new place is and also reckon with a bunch of memories from her past.
And even though it's only an ebook digital cover, you can also just see, like looking from the cover alone, just how beautifully haunting this book is. It really is a modern ghost story, and I can't wait to talk more with you about it. Okay, finally, last but not least, we have Trung Lee Nguyen. Could you introduce yourself, Trung?
Hello, everyone. My name is Trung Lee Nguyen. I am the author of The Magic Fish. It's my debut graphic novel, and it's coming out through Random House Graphic on October 13th. Did I miss anything there?
If you want to share a little bit about your book, please feel free.
Oh, sure. Yes, my book is about and my pronouns. Yes, I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. Thank you for reminding me. And my book is about an intergenerational, it's an intergenerational story about an immigrant family that tries to navigate the ups and downs of queerness and expression of it while they don't have a common language to express it. So it's about finding how to express love when you don't have the same words for it.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I'm going to take us right into our questions. So for everyone, I do want to start off by asking, what was the first seed that got planted in your mind that inspired your book? Where did your earliest inspiration come from? If we want to answer in alpha order, Idib, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. The first seed of Darius the Great Deserves Better came from the book before, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, which is a total cop-out. But I don't know, I don't ever feel like I have individual seeds. I always feel like there's lots of little ideas that kind of go into the Vitamix that is my mind. And sometimes a mess pours out, and sometimes a delicious idea smoothie pours out. And so I think I was thinking about queerness and family dynamics and the kind of unique struggles of middle-class families. And also I was thinking about soccer a lot. And in my day job that I used to have before the quarantines, I did like a soccer coaches convention. So say again.
And tea.
Oh, and tea.
Yeah.
That's always in the front of my mind, no matter what. But in my day job, I did a convention of like high school soccer coaches, and they were talking about like how they make their teams more inclusive, how they build sportsmanship, and like teach their kids to be nice to each other. And I was like, oh, that's really fascinating. You wouldn't think you would see that kind of thing in kind of any sort of sports arena. And so I was really interested in exploring what that might look like if it in fact worked.
I feel like if you don't include tea in some way in every single one of your books now, I'll be very disappointed.
Oh, I don't know if it, I don't know. Oh, see, that's too much pressure now.
Sorry, didn't put you on the spot. Arvin, how about you?
So, I mean, I spent a summer in Rome 2 years ago. It was 2018. Call Me by Your Name had just come out, and Master of None Season 2, where Aziz Goes to Italy, had come out. So I really just went to Rome to write because I thought that was where my gay side and my brown side were meant to converge. It was like an Aziz Elio mashup in my head. But those were two sides I never really reconciled together. I'd always kept them very separate. But in Rome, I got really, like my first weekend, I walked into a bookstore and met this really friendly, gorgeous bookseller who told me to go to a bar. And at this bar, there was a queer Iranian bartender. Basically, you know, I spent that entire night at the bar and just became really good friends with this bartender who, I mean, he's a bartender, poet, like artist, just like a fascinating and really brilliant person, but also like he was so proud of both sides of who he was. Like I saw him be gay and Iranian kind of in the same breath. And so, you know, this basically the rest of the summer I spent with this, you know, friend Jahan and the bookseller Neil and, you know, all the other people in their friend group. And it was kind of like this found family dynamic that I'd never had before as a queer person. at the end of the summer, I was traveling, and I'm kind of used to this at this point, like kind of getting stopped and asked questions when I'm like traveling, especially, I mean, I was in Rome for 2 months. So it was like a, customs officer stopped me and had a bunch of questions around what I was doing there. But I got into the story of the summer. I got into kind of this story of my friends and how I've been hanging out with gay people in Rome. And that was a little bit to kind of say like, oh no, I'm not threatening like you think I am. I've actually been hanging out with a bunch of gay people in Rome all summer. And after that, I thought about that, and I thought about the kind of model minority myth that I was trying to project there, that like, I'm not like the other Muslims that maybe you've stopped before, like I am a gay Muslim, as if that made me less threatening somehow. And that's when I came up with the opening line of the book in an interrogation room at the airport. First, let me get one thing straight. I'm not a terrorist, I'm gay. And that kind of set the stage for the rest of the novel, which is the story of that summer, but as told to an officer in that kind of an airport situation.
It's a very unique place to get.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to, I don't know. I the book came from so many weird random places, but I wouldn't have wanted to write it any other way.
So I think I'm next. So I guess I can talk really quickly about When You Were Everything, since that came out earlier this year, and also about Fly Girls, since that's coming out soon. When You Were Everything, I feel like started probably when I was like 12. The seed of the story, I mean, that was when I had my first friendship breakup. So this is a friendship breakup story. And so that was the first time it had happened to me. I was 12, I was best friends with a girl who went to my church, and she started middle school before me, and like the year before I went. And she just kind of became too cool to be my friend because I was still in elementary school and she had moved on. And I, like, in retrospect, there were other things going on, like I'm 100% not straight, and I didn't know that at the time, so I was probably a little bit in love with her. So there are some other complications there, but I think that was the first time it happened to me. It happened to me a couple times after that as well. Like almost at every major stage in my life, I had like a really traumatic friendship breakup. It happened then, and then it happened in middle school, it happened in high school, it happened in college, it happened as an adult. And I feel like it's this thing that we don't talk about often enough, how devastating it can be. Because, there's this whole narrative of friends being forever. Whereas, when you're dating someone, you kind of expect that you're either going to marry that person or you're going to break up, and you're probably going to break up. But with friends, there's this whole other dynamic where you just expect them to be around all the time and for the rest of your life. And that's just so not the case. So I wanted to write a story that sort of addressed that and gave it the weight that I feel like it deserves, the weight that romantic relationships get. And that friendships are rarely given. So that was where When You Were Everything came from. With Fly Girls, I was actually approached by Penguin Workshop to put something together that was about teens living in a city, multicultural teens or teens of color living in a city, and like I could kind of come up with everything else. And I had never read a story where it was Black girls who were sort of allowed to feel all of their feelings. It was Black girls who were allowed to be imperfect. It was artsy Black girls, because that was me when I was a teenager. And so that's kind of where the series came from. Each book follows a different girl in their friend group. And the first one, Lux, is about a girl who's a photographer, but who also has like really serious anger issues, and gets into a lot of fights. And Micah is about a girl who has anxiety, but she's also an artist, a painter. So yeah, I wanted to write these books because I wanted to give Black girls a series where they could feel the full breadth of their feelings and be soft, but also, be troublemakers, be smart. Yeah, all these things at once that we are.
I was just going to say, I really love, especially how Micah's book focuses on mental health, because I think it's absolutely something that doesn't get talked about enough in communities of color. So it's just a really beautiful story. Ginoda, how about you?
Yeah, so my book, The Stars and the Blackness Between Them, when it first, oh, I don't know why I had to lift it up. We lifted it up earlier. It's all good. I really feel like this book was blossomed around the time that I was doing a lot of activism with Black Lives Matter, BLM, both, you know, locally and other places. So it's kind of interesting because it's like a deeply queer love story about Black girls. But really, the sort of seed of the book initially was around like somebody who's experiencing, you know, a love of, you know, or like death row, like, so a man on death row, and then there's a kid with like a death sentence in a way, or like who's sick or what have you. And just kind of looking at Black humanity from these two, you know, vantage points. What ended up beautifully blossoming was that like it became a very queer book. It became a very diasporic book. It became a book that I think like spoke to the ways that like Blackness is kind of limitless as well as complex and provincial. So you have a girl from Trinidad who's very much, you know, a Trini girl, you know, and like, and, you know, has a strong connection with her grandmother, who's like an herbalist and kind of a healer. And I really wanted to acknowledge like kind of all these older Black women who, you know, are grandmas who've had these like beautiful, sensuous, complicated lives that, you know, we don't often get to like uplift like this idea and archetype. When we think of elder Black women, it's often like desexualizing them and sort of invalidating their wisdom or validating their wisdom and or what have you, and desexualizing them. So I really wanted, you know, to really add so much complexity to Black folks, Black girls. Like we have a lot of, you know, father figures that like really sort of blossomed in the process too. So I think like it became a book that really was around writing a book that I needed to connect to. And yeah, so like, even though like that was the seed, it ended up really being a deeply emotional book to write. And yeah, so that was the first little vibe of the seed. I'm gonna hand it to you, Nina.
All right, thank you. All of this is so wonderful. It's just, I'm really happy to be with all of you today, hearing about your books and, you know, admiring all of your writing so much. It's really a pleasure. And I'm thinking, Adib, about your idea smoothie, because I feel like that's just such an apt metaphor, right, for what happens. And there are so many different sources of inspiration that I had for Watch Over Me, but I think one of the ways that it started was I had written all of these novels, and I find writing novels to be like wonderful, but also so exhausting. Just kind of figuring out the structure and the world and these characters and what is it really about. And I thought, you know, I really want to do a retelling, because if I do a retelling of a story, then I can start with like an actual story and characters, and I don't have to invent it all myself. And so I also really wanted to write something about ghosts, because I just love ghosts. In general, I always have, and I have wanted to find the right story for them and never really could. And so I thought I would start with The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, because it's a book that I used to teach when I taught high school. And also I like it because there's a governess, and so a governess could be young, so it could be YA, and there were children. And after writing so many books where it was all about the teenagers and their relationships with one another, I really wanted to bring in different generations and like a bunch of different ages and explore relationships that, you know, crossed all sorts of age designations and different types of closeness. And so I thought, here's what I'll start with. But then as soon as I started brainstorming, of course, it veered so far from Turn of the Screw. And so it's not even really an apt comparison anymore. But I will tell one short story that's part of the idea smoothie for how the book was made. And that is that I knew I wanted to write a story about ghosts, and I didn't quite know what it was going to be. And I was in the car with my daughter, and we were pulling out of our house, like off the street. And I drove a couple blocks down, and my daughter was like 4 or so, and she was in the back seat. And I saw this old woman, she was standing on the side of the road, and she was wearing like a nightgown, and she had, in one hand, she had a plastic daisy, and in the other hand, she had something that looked like tree roots, like the gnarled roots of a tree. And she was just standing there holding those things and looking blankly out at the street. And I slowed down because I didn't see anybody with her, and she didn't look like she was okay. And so I slowed down, and then I turned, and my daughter said, like, why are we heading back? Why are we going back home? And I said, oh, I'm just checking something out. I just want to make sure that someone's okay. And so I turned around, I pulled over right across the street from the woman, and I was just staring out the window at her, wondering if I needed to call someone or, get out and check in. And my daughter said, what are you staring at? And I said, I'm staring at that woman. And she said, what woman? And I just felt a chill down my spine. And so that's part of the inspiration too. And that woman made it into the book.
Oh my God.
I just got goosebumps when you were saying that, because she is in the book too, in a very prominent way. Yeah.
Oh, you brought us a ghost story in your intro. I'm here for Nina.
You said that you liked ghost stories. So I was like, that's what I'm going to tell.
That's wonderful. Trung, what was the seed for your story?
Oh my gosh. So The Magic Fish is sort of a grand confluence of a lot of different stories. Since this is my debut and I couldn't believe that I got a graphic novel deal, I think I'm the only graphic novelist here, so I have to do a really good job, I'm convinced. But because I was like, I had it in my head that I'm never gonna be able to tell another story like this before. So I'm gonna cram all the stories that are important to me into one book. And so I decided to do like a Princess Bride style story within a story, framing narrative. And it was very important to me that it be a graphic novel, since I'm primarily an artist and I'm I consider myself an author second. I'm very kind of wobbly on my legs when it comes to actually telling stories. And so I have always been fascinated by fairy tales and retellings. And I loved the notion of fairy tales being quite a lot like people, where it moves from region to region and it changes clothes depending on where it finds itself in order to survive, in order to persist. And people are quite a lot like that. And I come from a family who are, I'm a first and a half generation Vietnamese American immigrant. I was born in the Philippines in a refugee camp, and my parents were refugees. And so storytelling has always been sort of a way for us to connect. And we used to read a lot of fairy tales together in order for me to develop my language skills and my reading skills, and also so that my parents could develop theirs at the same time as well. So it became this sort of this bonding activity that really helped us feel safe in our navigating the world that we were going to go through together. So in a way, we sort of grew up together. The heart of this story wound up coming forth in my personal life. I went to Italy last year, and I went with my grandmother and my partner, and my grandmother used to be a nun, and she really wanted to see all of these different places on her bucket list. And so we decided, okay, we're going to take her to Italy, and we're going to take her to all the old churches. We're going to take her to the cathedrals, and I love art history, so I'm going to be able to talk to her about all of these things. And there were things that I had taken for granted in my explaining to my grandmother what a museum was. She'd never been in an art gallery or a museum before in her entire life. And so we would take her to an art gallery, and she would go up and attempt to touch a Bernini, and the docent and I would just lose our minds. And we would, there were just small cultural things that we just didn't quite appreciate about each other. And then, and I got engaged there as well. And my grandmother was absolutely overjoyed, but we couldn't share that with each other to the extent that we really wanted to, because we lacked a language barrier. I have a very rudimentary understanding of Vietnamese, and she doesn't speak any English, and none of us really spoke Italian. So it was just the three of us kind of making our way through Italy, very clumsily, and trying to make this experience together. And her way of making sure that she knew that I was happy was insisting that we ordered wine with every meal, and that I, had snacks literally all of the time. And so trying to bridge gaps in communication and figuring out how to tell a story about the expression of love when the language that acts as this binding force just doesn't exist was kind of the impetus of my story.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way of thinking about it. Speaking of language, I did have some questions that kind of groups all of you into pairs. So for Adib and Trung, both of your books incorporate elements from other languages like Vietnamese and Farsi. how did you approach bringing them into your writing on a textual level? Did you encounter any challenges, or was it like mostly a straightforward process?
I'm really flattered that you think I know what I'm doing when it comes to that, because it was really very much dictated by the needs of the story, and just kind of my own recollections of living in the space of recognizing the language but not really speaking it. So I don't know that I brought any more intentionality to it than just trying to capture the feeling of being slightly outside of your own culture. Is there a second part of the question that I blanked on?
Oh, no,
No.
It was, yeah,
Okay,
it was
good.
mostly, yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm a very like holistic writer in that, which is my very fancy way of saying that I never know what I'm doing, and I just wait for someone else to read the book and tell me what I've done.
In my case, the language usage was something that I was really self-conscious of because Vietnamese is not a language that I'm super literate in, but I understand enough to be able to read and kind of make my way through it in conversation very casually. And so the kind of more technical details of making sure that the language came across correctly was that I kind of had to be the one to copy edit myself in my own language, and then sending them off and making sure that the letterer knew to include all of the correct diacritical marks, because Vietnamese is also a tonal language. And so if you lack certain diacritical marks, the entire word is misspelled and it's a completely different word, and it's potentially disastrous. And so there were some challenges there. And since this is all very technical because it is a graphic novel, so part of the production is that I would send the script out to our graphic designer and layout artist, Patrick, and he would come up with a font for me, and then we would have to input. Sometimes we'd have to like figure out how to add different diacritical and accent marks that weren't necessarily there to begin with, to make sure that the language stays consistent and that there isn't any misinterpretation that happens along the way. And then beyond that, kind of from a broader storytelling perspective, one of the things that I find to be really important is the use of iconography in storytelling. One of the many kind of jumping off points for new readers are always picture books, and we sort of denigrate them a little bit. But with graphic novels, there is this kind of understanding that there's an orthography to the images that applies to the text as well. It becomes its own textual language with its own grammar. And so the fact that we can read images is also a separate language unto itself, and it's much more accessible in most cases. And so the use of language across images and text and across different spoken languages as well is something that I had to be really intentional about with my book.
It's so interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing. Next up, I did want to ask both Nina and Ashley. So your books play with time through flashbacks as well as alternating between timelines, which is the case with When You Were Everything. So what challenges do you have to overcome to ground that sense of time within your books?
I guess I'll go first. You know, a funny story is I had started writing this book, and I read We Are Okay, like as I was like halfway through the first draft. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I need to do. So We Are Okay is 100% the reason why I struggled to do this dual timeline, because I was basically, I had the dual timeline in there, but it was not working at all. And I could not figure out why. And my editor, bless her soul, did this whole like chart sort of, she like drew basically like what I was trying to do and what I was like not doing at all. Like what I was trying to accomplish versus like what I needed to accomplish. And of course, like, my timeline didn't end up exactly like the timeline in We Are Okay, but that was 100% where like she, like Nina does it. If you haven't read this beautiful book, number one, like do it. But she does it by month, and I could not figure out a way to route the back and forth in time. And that reading We Are Okay, I was like, oh, like I just need to tell people what month it is. So yeah, that is, I will say, it was definitely a struggle. It was still really, really complicated to figure out what was happening when, to make sure that the timeline ended up making sense, because the way that my timeline works is they sort of crash into each other. Like the book, where the book starts is where the alternate timeline ends. And so I had to make sure that the things that were happening were lining up in a way that details were revealed in the past that you needed for what was happening in the future. And so it was really, really difficult. There was so much moving around of stuff, and my timeline's also sort of, the past gets closer and closer together a little bit as you get to the end of it, and as things get worse and worse for everyone involved. So yeah, it was a rough revision process, which is why When You Were Everything came out 2 years after The Beauty That Remains, and it was originally supposed to come out the next year. But I'm really, really happy with where it ended up, and We Are Okay was part of the inspiration for how I made it there.
Oh, that's the best. What a perfect pairing then, talking about it. That's so great. Time is always super hard for me. It was really hard in We Are Okay to figure out how to do that. So I'm glad that the end result seemed like it knew what it was doing, because it took a lot of effort to get it that way. And then with Watch Over Me, it was also one of the biggest challenges for the book, because there's a backstory that takes place over the course of several months, and then there's a current story. And with this one, with Watch Over Me, I came in thinking I knew exactly what I wanted the timeline to be, or how I wanted that structure to be. And I wanted a frame narrative. Like, I wanted to start with Mila when she arrives to the farm. Then I wanted, at the middle section of the book, to go back in time, tell the whole story of the past, and then to find her on the farm again with this new information and continue. And I thought, like, I love that structure. It's such an elegant structure. And I thought for sure that would work. And I kept trying to make it work, and it would not work. It just was impossible. So then I had to kind of start from scratch in terms of how am I going to, tell this backstory. And I ended up cutting the backstory down quite a bit in order to make it work. And it also, one of the best things about having to do that, though, was that it challenged me to really think about what the story is about. And to me, it's about how, like, our pasts intermingle with our presents, and we're never entirely done with anything, and what has happened in our past can come and flare up and remind ourselves of past wounds, even when we thought that we were over them. And then we need to become stronger as people so that we can be like, okay, yes, I see you, past self, I see how this hurt you, and I'm okay now, or I'm better now, and I know how to look at you in a way that I didn't before. And so having the memories kind of come throughout the novel instead of in their tiny little compartment is actually kind of what the whole book is about, that you can't keep those past experiences in a neat little sandwich in the middle of your book. You have to, sometimes you have an idea smoothie and it's just going to be mixed in there with everything else.
Yeah, speaking about how the process of writing does require you to compartmentalize stuff and organize stuff. Arvin and Ginoda, I wanted to ask both of you about writing multiple perspectives, since that's something that both of you do in your books. So how do you do it? Is a short question. But what helps you flow between the mindset of your different characters and keep their perspectives distinct? Because when I was reading both your books, they really are such distinct voices. So I was just wondering how that came about.
Mute, unmute.
Arvin, I think you're on mute.
I didn't do it at first, is the secret. So I actually wrote How It All Blew Up. It's a coming of age story about this 18-year-old boy, Amir. So I wrote the whole book entirely from his point of view, and not just from his point of view as a dramatic monologue, because the opening is said to the officer, first, let me get one thing straight, I'm not a terrorist, I'm gay. The whole book was in the second person in that first draft, as told to the officer. And so that was an interesting writing exercise. And I wrote it that way because I had read a similarly formatted book, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, actually while I was in Rome. And I was obsessed with that format. It was like a whole dramatic monologue for, as told to someone that the main character meets at a cafe in Pakistan. And I loved how you could play with kind of like the person's reactions to the things that you say, and also just the way that it's like a nod to, storytelling and oral storytelling, which is such an important part of this character Amir's culture. So it was originally all in that POV. But then, as I was writing it, he runs away, and all the while his family's trying to figure out what happened to him, and eventually coming to terms with like, would we rather have our son be gay or not have him at all? That doesn't exist in a vacuum. I think there's just as much nuance in like, the people around you's thinking around it as there is in like the person who's actually coming out, especially in like an immigrant family, a Muslim family, a family that might culturally struggle. And so that's where I, started to kind of flesh out, because Amir was, he's being interrogated in one room, but his mom, dad, and sister are in these other rooms at the same time telling their side of the story. So I started sharing their side of the story too, in the same kind of like second person dramatic monologues. And that was really special because I feel like in so many of like coming out narratives that we see, you see like the moment of coming out with a family. And a lot of times it's like nasty and messy, especially around like immigrant and religious families that like don't necessarily have, it's not that they're closed-minded, it's that they don't have the vocabulary around coming out. Maybe in the moment they don't say the things that they should. But there's a lot of reflection that goes on in between. So the great thing about having this family a few weeks after kind of discovering that their son is gay while he was away, and then eventually kind of like coming to terms with it, figuring it out, was that it comes from a place of like thoughtfulness and love, and also they're speaking to these authority figures. And so you are kind of getting like a more polished events that happened. And I didn't want to serve the same kind of stereotype that you see in so many media of like, like kid from religious background or kid with immigrant parent comes out and they get kicked out of the house. Like that was never going to be, because we see enough of that. That stereotype is hammered into queer kids like mentality enough when they're growing up, and it scares them shitless to come out. And it's not that like those stereotypes are not unfounded, but I wanted to show that like these families are really operating from a perspective of love, that like, especially in immigrant and religious families, like love is often the number one thing. It just takes little time to see that. And like these multiple POVs, while Amir, the main character, is talking about how he ran away and found this found family, like I think it shows both of those sides of like coming out and coming of age. The good parts of coming out and meeting people like you, and the shitty parts of like talking to your family and helping them get there.
Ginoda, how about you? Because I know your book starts off with Audrey going through a pretty traumatic experience with her mom and going through the whole book trying to heal from that. So how did you approach that?
Yeah, I feel like for me, I was certainly like, I'm a person that grew up in Minneapolis. Both my parents are Caribbean. But a lot of my sort of, like experience of being Black was being both, a diasporic Black person and also Black American in a lot of ways. So like in writing the book, like I feel like I really wanted to play with sort of the limitlessness of Blackness and the ways that Blackness exists in different ways and gets to be in conversation with itself, especially in the context of like Black queer love, which was something that was very important to me as a young person. Like, and I think that's what I love just hearing about like all of y'all talk about, writing. I think a lot of us are writing from queer spaces or queer friendship spaces where you're just like, like these relationships are so defining to who we are. But also, live in these spaces that, don't always reflect people who look like us or desire in the ways that, we desire. So I think for me, it was really exciting to think about this queer love connection between two Black girls, but who come from very different realities and are able to like show this deep sense of like seeing and loving and caring for one another. What I loved about, but I think for me, like in writing the POV, so like I had one character who's like from Minneapolis where I felt very much like, like Black Minneapolis vernacular, Black American vernacular is a place that I feel very comfortable. Trini, like vernacular and voice is entirely different, you know? And also I grew up in a household where one of my parents is Trinidadian, one of my parents is Crucian. So even the way that I heard island dialect was influenced by the fact that my mom had moved from Trinidad. So anyways, I say all that to say is that like, I also didn't want it to feel like, and I had to kind of let it go at some point too. I was like, oh, like, I don't want to feel it like it's a Black American trying to write Trini, or a Trini, you know, first generation trying to write Trini. And I really was just like, you know what, I'm gonna do my best. Like, but for me, I couldn't also do a Trini story and not bring the accent, because to me, so much of what Blackness is in the provincial sense is the way that like we like sort of, I don't know, like kind of like flip our swag of Blackness regionally. So like you can go to Brazil and everybody look like your auntie there, but like Brazilian Blackness feels a certain kind of swag and many. So I really wanted to like play with that, even with Trinidadian. It's like I wanted to be like, yeah, like how would a Trini girl speak today? So I had a lot of help with that. Like I had one of my homies who's a Trini, you know, yeah, like kind of look over it and, you know, give thoughts. I really, for me, vernacular and like, whatchamacallit, slang is like such an inherent dialect of adolescence, you know? So it's like, I really wanted my characters as, you know, young Black kids to not sound like, because in my mind growing up, there was like literary language and then how I spoke and lived my language, you know? So I think like in telling these two Black stories, it's like, yeah, like I really wanted their mouths to be filled with their experiences in a way. But I also didn't feel like always confident about it. I was like, you know, and then I just was like, you know what, all I can do is do my best. And really do try to hope that people who are Trini see the, you know, the ways that like I valued the way their mouth says words, you know, and not be like, oh my gosh, why did she do this? Like she needs to stay in her lane. And like for the most part, people seem to be feeling it, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I want to make sure that we do have time to get some of the audience questions that have been submitted. So before we do that real quick, I'm going to take us through a lightning round of questions. So feel free to chime in real quick with the first thing that comes to mind. So first question, are you a plotter, a pantser, a plantser, or a headlights writer?
Headlights.
Depends on the book.
Plotter with a pantsing moon.
But your headlights are in the 11th house.
The plantser. I like the hybrid option.
I'm fully a pantser, I think.
Ginoda, what about you?
Okay, say it again, the question.
Plotter, pantser, plantser, or headlights writer?
I don't know if I know what these things mean. So I'm trying to.
Sorry.
So headlights, I feel like headlights is the most confusing one. That's just like you plan for like a little bit and then you write to that point and then you plan a little bit more and then you write to that point. Plotter is obviously they plot the whole thing. Pantser is you just fly by the seat of your pants. And then the combo.
Oh gosh, wow. Thank y'all for dropping some new lingo on me. Like I was not ready for it at all. And I was really trying to catch on. And then I couldn't, I just had to be real. I think for me, like I just am deeply inspired and then I'm obsessed. And then it like comes to me in spits and spurts and then I write. Which one is that, y'all? Categorize me.
I think
you know, Ginoda, I think that's everything kind of entangled together.
I think so too. I think entangled writing should be a thing because I relate to that.
I'm an entangler. I'm an entangler.
You're an entangler. Make a fifth word.
That's a lovely word. All right, next up, what is your snack and or beverage of choice when you're on deadline?
Sunflower seeds. Or anything where there's like a lot of little things. M&Ms, Skittles, gummy bears, like, yeah.
Chips and hummus, pita chips and hummus.
This will surprise no one but tea.
That's why I put in the beverage option, just for you, tea.
I was gonna say the same thing, copious amounts of tea, because it just keeps my stomach chill so I can just be like, ah, ah. So yeah, I can't even think about food.
I'm a classic coffee drinker during deadline.
Back in the before times, if I could go like to a coffee shop, it was a special treat to have like espresso, but it had to have like the fizzy water with it. If there's no fizzy water, I just don't want the espresso at all because I'm mostly there for the fizzy water.
Adib, fizzy water was like one of the only 3 words I learned in Italian while I was there because I also needed the fizzy water with my espresso. So I think I said like hello, coffee, and fizzy water. Acqua fissante.
Fissante. Okay.
Fissante. Yeah.
I'm like so fancy. Y'all are so fancy. Y'all are fancy.
Fizzy water is really good though.
Tron, how about you?
Oh, yeah.
I'm a ginger ale person. Yeah, I like a little kick. I like for it to hurt just a little bit, and then I like the fizzy water to like kind of get a little focused. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, finally, what is an upcoming book from another author that you're excited for? I'm going to mean to make you choose one, but if you want to choose more than one, that's fine.
I just finished this earlier this week. I read the most incredible middle grade, and I think every kid, every adult should read it. It's Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri. And Trung, I think especially you, because you were talking earlier about storytelling and your experience as a refugee. This book is by, it's about Daniel, who was is a refugee himself. His family fled Iran when he was a kid and landed in Oklahoma. And so he's kind of in his 5th grade classroom, because it's like an autobiographical novel. He's this like modern day Scheherazade, basically like regaling his classmates with like story after story, myth after myth. Like some of them are like ancient Persian myths from like, that his dad told him growing up. And some of them are just poop stories. But basically he's just like, he's weaving all these stories together to like survive day after day, kind of like Scheherazade, but like instead of getting killed by the king, he just doesn't want like a spitball on his neck.
That sounds amazing. I want to read this.
It's anything like
it's brilliant. It got like 6-star reviews. It's like it's oh my god, it's just the most like magical, transportive middle grade I've read in so long.
Awesome.
If his dad is anything like my family members, the poop stories may also have been old family stories.
Well, and it's funny because like eventually, like near the end of the book, his teacher's like, okay, enough with the poop stories. I need you to like actually be vulnerable. And he's like, fine, I'll talk about the emotional parts. Like it's such a like 12-year-old thing to do. Like he might be a modern day Scheherazade, but he's still a 12-year-old boy, and he's gonna avoid vulnerability by telling you another poop story.
I'm really excited to read The Summer of Everything by Julian Winters. I pre-ordered it. I'm very excited. Yeah. I just love Julian's stories. They're so like full of light. And I feel like I really need that right now.
Oh, I'm reading it right now, and it's everything you want from a Julian Winters book.
I'm excited.
I'm really excited about Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. I have Melinda and I have kind of come up together in the YA world. Our first books were published the same year, and she used to live in the Bay Area back then too. And it's set in San Francisco and queer, historical, and I'm just super excited for it.
I'm really excited for Vampires Never Get Old, which is an anthology edited by Natalie C. Parker and Zoraida Cordova, in which people that weren't white and sparkly and straight wrote vampire stories. And I'm just really excited for it.
I'm really excited for, I think this came out super recently, but I got The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Tokuta Hall. And I haven't read anything about, I haven't read it yet, but the things that I've read about it make it sound like it's right up my alley. It's like got pirates and like they're gender nonconforming, and there's a little bit of there's a lot of adventure and a little bit of romance, and it's all of my favorite things. I'm very excited to read it.
I'd like to second Melinda Lowe's book, which I have a copy of, and now I got time to actually jump into, and for all of the reasons that you spoke. And also Everybody Looking by Candace.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. So, poetry and, queer coming of age dance story. So yeah, I'm excited for it to hit the world and shine.
Awesome. Okay, we do have a few minutes left for audience Q&A. So first up, I have a question for Trung. How is it different to develop relationships between characters when you're creating a graphic novel? I'm assuming it's like opposed to a prose novel.
Okay, sure. And I'm not sure how accurate my comparison is going to be because I've never written a prose novel. And so plotting out a relationship over the course of a prose novel, I think, is much more dense. And the information that you have to convey in a graphic novel is a lot more, like you have to make sure that all of the images carry a lot of the weight of the relationships. And so what I end up writing in my scripts tends to be a lot of like character context, like what are they feeling in this moment and how is their face supposed to look, and you know, what is their body language supposed to look like. And it's very dry and instructional. Like I'll like write the script first and then I'll be like, okay, artist me is going to take care of this later, so I need to be super detailed about what needs to go into the panels and the pages right now. And so most of the time I'll have to make little like miniature wiki entries for each of my characters and figure out where they are in their relationships with each other and how to best convey that with not necessarily words and not necessarily narration all of the time. And so it might just be a bit of a technical difference for me.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. For Ashley, we have a question. What advice or thoughts or notes on your process do you have for writing shorter works that also target kids reading up, as with the Fly Girl series? They're also curious to hear how folks think about writing queer YA as distinct from a more general YA genre that has often centered white cis boys.
Tips for writing shorter. Okay. The main reason why I was excited to work on this series is because I am extremely long-winded. And I needed a lot of practice writing shorter stories, and I guess focusing on plot. I'm very much someone who thinks about character first. And so a lot of times my first drafts are just my characters walking around talking to each other, but nothing's actually happening. So the great thing about writing Fly Girls was that I had to focus a lot more closely and a lot more intently on plot. And now that I've done that, I feel like I can bring it to writing longer works and just add in more detail, which I think will be really, really instructive as I start to work on longer novels again. So I feel like tips that I guess I developed over the course of working on these novels. There are 4 books in the series, and each one was easier to write than the one before it, just because I sort of got into the swing of things. But I would say focus on like a moment in the beginning, a moment in the middle, and a moment in the end that are going to be sort of the most revealing for your character. So like where you start, where you know your character wants to end up, and then the moment in the middle that sort of starts that shift. I found that to be really helpful when I was working on these. And I think that is applicable to both shorter stories, but also longer ones. Another thing was to just like, you have to be very precise in your character development. Like everything your character says has to do character work. Every action they take has to reveal who they are. So you can't just have them walking around. Or if they are, they need to be walking with a purpose and walking to wherever they're going for a reason. So yeah, just being more deliberate in everything that your character says and does. I thought of dialogue as more of like a script, like in a movie, because everything that is said in a movie is working towards making the plot move forward. And so just thinking about dialogue in that way, as opposed to just like, oh, she's just gonna say something witty right now. Like, like that's fine, but like it needs to mean something, or it needs to make something happen. So yeah. And the other part of the question was for everyone, right? Like about queerness and writing into queer spaces. So I'll just say my part really quick so somebody else can talk. Actually, in the Fly Girl series, the second 2 books in the series do deal with queerness, because one of the main characters is questioning, and then the last character is already out, and so queerness is just naturally a part of her story. But I think as far as writing into those spaces, it was definitely a journey for me. Like my first my first book, The Beauty That Remains, has a queer white boy just because that was the only way that I was comfortable writing about queerness. And then in When You Are Everything, there's a side character who is a girl of color who is queer. And so I feel like I've been circling closer and closer to it. And I just finished a novel that hasn't been sold, isn't, a thing yet, an official thing yet. But I finally sort of made it to writing like my personal experience. So I'll say for me personally, it has been a journey because I did sort of feel like my story wasn't valid because I hadn't really seen it anywhere. And I think that's why Ginoda's book was so beautiful to me. And so like, I don't know, just like, it was the first time I had seen a Black queer girl, and like they were in love and they were so different, but their love story was still this really beautiful sort of expansive thing. And yeah, so I'm grateful that more of those stories are happening right now and coming out.
Yeah, Ashley, I just want to, it's funny you mapping it out from book 1 to 2 it was the exact same roadmap for me. My first book had a queer white side character because I thought like that was, and I was really hoping my family would like pick up on that because my main character was like Iranian, but like this guy was, anyway. My second book had like a much more minor queer character, like an adult. And then with my third book, it wasn't, reading a story like Ginoda's, but it was meeting someone like Jahan, who I guess like a real life, but people are real life books. But someone who I saw those two sides of me that I always kept separate, like coexisting and not knowing that it could be like that. So just don't rush it, because when it feels right, whether it's because you've read the right book or met the right person, or just for whatever reason feel the most comfortable telling that whole beautiful story of all the parts of you, like you'll feel it and you'll feel compelled to tell that story. But don't rush it. Never let someone pressure you into writing a queer story or talking about that side of yourself until you're ready, because I do feel like
to name though that I think there's reasons why people don't feel comfortable writing both queer and BIPOC characters at the same time. And I think a lot of it has to do with the industry, potentially, you know what I mean? Like, I do feel like there's ways that, like I feel like I think I totally agree, like write whatever characters when it feels comfortable, but I also feel like a lot of that is influenced by the ways we're taught to see as either these stories are valuable, whether, it's safe, to share these stories, which I feel like is a thing that I love that we're in a time right now where like, look at this panel, you know what I mean? Like these are YA stories that, a lot of are queer, a lot, are weird. And growing up, like I had to like dig deeply into Anne Rice to be like, where's some gay, sexy shit, you know what I mean? Like, and now we got it all over the place and all over the world, so.
Yeah, I want to echo those sentiments as well. I feel like as like queer authors and authors of color, we often find ourselves with this dual challenge of both telling a good story, and we're also sort of pressured to be experts about our own stories. And I think that we're in a place where we kind of feel comfortable telling imperfect stories about ourselves now. And so we're less inclined to feel the pressure to edify people about ourselves. We just want to tell our messy, queer, brown stories. And I think that's enough. And we're kind of moving into a place where like, I don't feel especially like I need to look for precedents where there aren't really a whole lot of them. I can just tell stories that are important to me.
I just let my righteous anger at J.K. Rowling fuel all of my queer brown stories.
And I need some of that J.K. money. Breaking us off, right. Please. My J.K. reparations.
I just feel like be gay, do crimes is a really excellent motto for a writing career.
And I will say, like Nina's books were definitely the first female stories where I encountered, that kind of love. So yeah.
It's interesting because I was listening, and especially what Ashley and Arvin were saying about taking time to get to tell that story. And I was like, when you were like, it was my third book, and for me, it was my third book too. That's when I wrote Everything Leads to You, which was the first female queer love story where my narrator was a queer girl. And it started off like I always had queerness, but it was always kind of peripheral. And it took until the third one to do that.
Oh yeah, I used to think like, oh, I can just scatter my queerness out like Horcruxes among the side characters. Sorry, HP reference, but it's vocabulary. But yeah, no, it wasn't until my third book that I was like, fuck Horcruxes, fuck JK. We're gonna make it, the main thing, the main act.
All of my like circling queerness books were also really bad, and so none of them will ever see the light of day because they're living in the trunk under my bed.
I can definitely say we're very appreciative to have all these stories, queerness or not, and in all its wonderful forms from all of you. That actually brings us to the end of our panel. So thank you very much to the 6 of you for being here. And thank you also to Brian, who's been serving as our wonderful ASL interpreter. If you are interested in, yes, go Brian. If you are interested in purchasing any of the books from these authors, we've just dropped a link to the buy page in the Zoom chat, and you can also go to bookyoursummerlive.com to buy and pre-order all their books. With that, thank you so much for tuning in, and happy reading.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Be gay, do crimes.
Yeah, be gay, do crimes. Tell your grandma about it. So nice to meet all of y'all. Y'all are the best. This was like really a gift.
I could talk to you guys forever.
Same,
Right.
same. Let's
Let's
do
do
it
this
again.
again sometime when the quarantines are over.
Yes.
In
Yes,
person.
we'll second that.
With wine.
Yeah, the wine. James, you was talking about drinks.
I know.
I know I neglected my duties as a bartender. I'm very sorry. But next time.
That it's always a possibility. It's always available, open.
Mhm.
All right. See you all later.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
everyone.
Bye-bye.